Baruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Mentes Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top. Our Mishnah gave us a list of things that are Dvarm HaMoisifin Hevel, and therefore things that you cannot use to insulate your pot before Shabbos. It gave us a list of things that are going to then add the intensity of the heat, whether they are dry or whether they are wet. But it also added another list and said there are additional things that are problematic because they'll come to then intensify the heat when they are wet, and therefore you cannot use them to insulate your pot before Shabbos. However, those very things, when they are dry, can yes be used to insulate your pot because they're not moistif heather, they're only going to be shomer the heat. Says the Gemara to comment on this. The Gemara wants to know, Lachin Machmas atzmon, are these things that are wet, that are moist, are they moist naturally? Or perhaps they are moist due to an exterior factor. Toshma, let's bring a proof. It says, Lo miteven beloy zagin, v'lo b'moichin, v'lo ba'asovin, bizman shehein lachin. Our Mishnah brings a list of various things that say when they are moist, they cannot be used because they'll intensify the heat. They're dvarim shemoistifin hevel. And amongst those things, the Gemara says, is a moichin. Moichin, we said, are things that are different types of fabric, of wool or cotton, and therefore they're soft items. The Gemara now says, if you want to say, we're talking about things that are naturally, that are coming externally to make something moist, then it makes sense, it's very good. How do we find moichin, these things like wool, that they are themselves naturally moist? Wool is a dry type of substance. Says the Gemara to explain, we're talking about wool that was in between the thighs of the lamb. When it becomes moist in that way, that's what we're talking about as well when it comes to moichin. Therefore, we don't have a proof that it's dafka things that are only from the exterior or the interior, because it could be things that become moist even from the interior. V'hodetani Rabbi Oshaya toimnin b'ksus yeveshu b'peiros yeveshin aval b'ksus leichav lo b'peiros lachin. Here it says that there are different things that are ksus, that are garments that are dry, and peiros, like different types of wheat and things that are dry. Those things can be used to then be matmin, but ksus that is wet, that are moist, or other peiros that are wet, not. Says the Gemara, ksus leicha machmas atzma hechi mishkachaslo. How do we find garments that indeed are things that are naturally moist? So therefore, lachar, we have a proof that the Mishnah is talking about specifically those things that are moist, that are coming from the outside, not things that are moist naturally, that are things that are intensifying the heat. Answers the Gemara, you have no proof. Here we're talking about, again, the ksus that we're referring to also are from the wool that is plucked from the lamb, and therefore it comes from between the legs of the lamb, and therefore it's naturally moist. So the Gemara has not proved one way or the other. Are we talking about specifically those things that are moist naturally, or even those things that are moist from the outside? The Gemara leaves it as a question. Now the Gemara brings a new Mishnah. Toimnin b'ksus ubepeiros b'kanfei yoino uvenasora shel charoshim uvenaora shel pishton dako. The Tana Kama says that there's a list of things over here that a person can use to then insulate his pot. We're talking about before Shabbos because there are things that are not moistif hevel, they're only going to then maintain or keep the heat, but not going to intensify the heat. What are these things? Again, you can turn in biksus, garments, beperos, different types of fruits, including, let's say, tavua, kanfe yoina. These are feathers. Here it refers to the feathers of the yona, but lav davka. Nesara shel charoshim, the sawdust of carpenters. Uvenara shel pishton daka, and the pieces that come when a flax is combed out. Those things can all be used to then insulate your pot. Rabbi Yehuda oiser bedaka umatir begas. Rabbi Yehuda says when it's daka, then it's oser. However, when it's gasa, when it's more thick, then it's going to be mutter. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yonai, Tefillin tzrichin guf noki, ke'alisha bal knofayim. Tefillin require a guf noki, a clean body, just like alisha bal knofayim. Ask the Gemara, what constitutes a guf noki? Ma'hi, what is this referring to? Abayomar shelo yafiach bohen. It means that a person can anticipate that if he would need to then be mafiach, then he'll be able to then anticipate and prevent himself from doing so. Rava Amar shelo yishon bohen. Rava argues and says, no, everybody can then prevent himself from perhaps being mafiach, but it has to be somebody who can prevent himself from falling asleep. What will be the problem itself of falling asleep? Because if a person is asleep, then he'll be yafiach, and that will then be a zilzul in the tefillin. So therefore, a person has to have a guf noki. Ask the Gemara now, v'amai kori le bal knofayim. Why do we refer to Alisha as Alisha bal knofayim? The one who is of the wings. Says the Gemara, shepom achas gozor malchus roimi harisho gezera al Yisrael. One time, the Romans made a special gezerah against Klal Yisrael. Shekol haimeniach tefillin yenakru es moichoy. Anybody who wears tefillin, they're going to then poke out his brains. V'hayalisha menicham v'yoytze l'shuk. And Elisha would wear his tefillin nonetheless, and he would go out to the shuk. Ro kasdor echad, one of the officers, the Roman officers, saw him wearing his tefillin. Rot miponov, rat achorov. Elisha saw that he was seeing him, so therefore he was in danger. Elisha ran away, but the officer ran after him. V'kivan shegiya etzloi. When the officer finally reached Elisha, notlon meiroshoy ve'achzon b'yodoi. Elisha took off his tefillin quickly and he put it in his hands. Omar loi, the officer said to Elisha, Mazeh b'yodcha, what is it in your hands? Omar loi, kanfe yoina, it's the wings of a bird. Poshat es yodoi v'nimtzoi kanfe yoina. Indeed, he opened up his hands, and indeed there was the wings of the yoina bird. Lefika koin oisa Elisha bal knofayim. Therefore, he merited this term, this title, as Elisha the bal knofayim. Umayshno kanfe yoina mishar ofis. Why did he choose to say that indeed this is the birds of the yoina? Why is that different than any other bird that he was referring to? Why referred to as the dove? Mishum the amtil knesses Yisrael la yoina, because Klal Yisrael are compared to the yoina bird. Shenemar, as it says, kanfe yona nechba bakesef. The yona bird is nechba bakesef. Ma yona knafel beginois aleo. Just as the yona, its wings are what protects it, either because it fights with its wings or it flies away specifically with its wings. Af Yisrael mitzvos maginois ale, and so too, Klal Yisrael, their mitzvos are what protects them. Therefore, Elisha bal knofayim, he saw that this tefillin, which is a mitzvah, the zchus of wearing the tefillin, will have the merit of being compared to the dove, the knafayim of the dove, which also protects itself, and therefore will then be protecting him. The Gemara now quotes the Mishnah that says, Minisara shal charoshim, when there's sawdust of carpenters, indeed the Mishnah said this can be used for insulating your pot because not moistif hevel. The Tanakama said this list, and it said, "B'misoros shel charoshim," and adds "b'naoros shel pishton dako." Whereas Rabbi Yehuda argues and says, "Dako is osir, gasa is mutter." Ask the Gemara, "Iboilohu Rabbi Yehuda an nesoros shel charoshim koi?" When Rabbi Yehuda says that dakos is osir and gasos are mutter, what was he referring to? Was he going back on the charoshim of the sawdust of the carpenters? In other words, was he referring to the second to last statement of the Tanna Kama? Or was he going on the last statement of the Tanna Kama that said, Na'ara shel pishton? Or Na'ara shel pishton koi? What was Rabbi Yehuda coming to argue on the Tanna Kama? Says the Gemara, let's bring a proof, Toshma. The Tanya says in the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda says, Na'oras shel pishton daka harehu kizevel. The pieces that come from a combing out of the flax, that is compared to the zevel. Just like the zevel is in the list in the Mishnah before, as being one of those things that are moisif hevel and are also to then be used to insulate your pot before Shabbos. So too then he compares the Na'ara shel pishton. So they see that Rabbi Yehuda says dakos are osir, gasos are mutter. He's referring to indeed the Na'ara shel pishton and not the sawdust of the carpenters. Shmamina Na'ara shel pishton koi shmamina. The Gemara now brings another Mishnah. Toimnin b'shlochim umetaltin oison. One is permitted to insulate his pots with hides of animals. Here we're referring to the hides of animals that still have the hair of the animals that are then usable for their insulation. And they're also able to then be moved afterwards. Because since they're these types of hides that are comfortable to sit on, they can be used as mats or as rugs. Therefore, they're not muktzah on Shabbos. Begizeit semer ve'em metalton. You can go ahead and use gizeit semer to insulate your pots before Shabbos because they're not moisif hevel. However, they are muktzah, and therefore you can't metaltel them. Why? Because they're going to be used subsequently for other purposes to then use as making strings and making garments and other things that you'll be using the gizeit semer, the shearings of this wool. And therefore they're going to be muktzah. Ask the Mishnah right away if you indeed use this for your insulating, and then you go ahead and then ultimately take off then the pot, the insulation. How are you going to do that? You can't metaltel the insulation, in this case the gizei semer, the shearings of the wood, because they're muktzah. Ask the Mishnah, what does he do? How does he then go ahead and remove the insulation to get to the pot? Answers the Mishnah, noitel es hakisui vehein noifles. Here we're talking about a kisu that has, let's say, a handle where there is no shearings of the wool, and therefore he has access to the pot without moving the shearings of the wool. When he then takes off the lid, the rest of the shearings will fall off. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, kupa mata al tzida v'noitel. Here we're talking about once you've then taken off the shearings of the wool, and now you want to get to the food. So it says over here, you have then the shearings that are around the pot, that are inside of the box. How do you then go ahead and take out the food? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is of the opinion, kupa mata al tzida, you then take the kupa, the box that the shearings and the pot are inside of, and then you tilt the box, the noitel, and then you take out the food that you want from the pot. Because if you don't do it in that way, maybe you'll take out the pot, and then you'll have a problem, because then the shearings of the wool will be in the guma, in the place where you want to put back the pot, whereby then you'll come to then remove the shearings of the wool and be a problem of moving muktzah. The Chacham say you can go ahead and take out the pot without having to tilt the box, and then after we machzir, the Gemara explained the shita of the Chachamim be'ezer Hashem.